My name is Claire Hamilton. I'm 31 years old, and I used to be a librarian living in a rundown apartment in the town of Eugene, Oregon. No one in my family believed I could ever amount to anything. They said I was plain, mediocre, not worth a single penny of investment. My stepmother called me a burden. My brother smirked every time I walked into a room. I got used to their condescending looks, to the family gatherings where my seat was always next to the door. But no one could have predicted what happened when my name was called during their own bankruptcy hearing, and everything flipped. At the King County Courthouse, the judge glanced down at the paperwork and then spoke. "The legal representative holding all outstanding debt from the Morgan family, please confirm your identity." I stood up. My mother collapsed. My brother dropped a stack of documents. "I'm Claire Hamilton, and I own everything they once stole from me." Have you ever been looked down on to your own family so thoroughly that they forgot you were even a person? Have you ever endured in silence only to one day return and make them bow their heads? If this story resonates with you, leave a comment below. Hit the like button to give me strength to continue. And don't forget to subscribe, because up next, I'll tell you exactly how I, a girl they wrote off, became the one who made the whole family tremble in court. I was born into a family where my existence seemed to never be factored in. My father, Thomas Hamilton, remarried before I even turned 8. The woman he married, Janet, was everything he considered successful: sharp, ambitious, socially connected, and absolutely intolerant of anything that didn't offer value. To her, I was a mistake, a leftover shockwave from his first marriage. "She's like a stone chained to your leg," I once overheard her say to my father late one night, thinking I was asleep. "I can't build a model family with her hanging around like a ghost." I lay still, eyes wide open in the dark, breathing as quietly as I could. I didn't cry. I was used to it. After Ryan was born, Janet focused all her attention on him, the golden boy, the perfect blend of two elite bloodlines. Ryan went to the best schools, had piano lessons, birthday parties at expensive hotels with guest lists full of rich kids. Me? I was dropped off at the library. Not because they encouraged reading, but because it was safe and cheap enough to dump a kid on the weekends, according to Janet. Over time, I grew to love it. The old bookshelves, the whisper of pages turning, the musty smell of old paper, it gave me a place to breathe. When I turned 16, I applied for a scholarship at a local community college in Eugene, Oregon. I knew I couldn't expect anything from my dad or Janet, but I tried just once the night before the application deadline. I sat at the dinner table, hands shaking as I held the forms. "I just need a cosigner. The school requires a guardian's income verification." Janet didn't look at me, still polishing her wine glass. My dad lifted his head, hesitating, but before he could speak, Janet chuckled. "No one invests in a girl who doesn't know how to dream big." I gripped the papers tightly, keeping my face neutral. "Sorry for bothering you." I turned away. I didn't listen if my dad called after me. I didn't want to. Later, I found a different full scholarship and applied by myself. I got accepted. Then I worked 3 jobs for 4 years to stay afloat, cleaning hotel rooms, waiting tables, doing data entry. No one at home ever asked what I was studying. No one came to my graduation. The day I received my bachelor's in information science, I stood alone in the campus courtyard, holding my wrinkled diploma that had been stuffed into my bag. A professor approached me and shook my hand. "You did very well, Claire. Are you planning to continue into research?" I smiled. "I need a break. I'm applying to be a librarian." And so I moved to a small town, working at the public library, managing archives, recommending books to retirees, reading stories to kids every Wednesday afternoon. I lived in a tiny rented apartment behind an old factory, drove a faded green 2004 Subaru, planted lavender in pots on my balcony, and bought hand-roasted coffee from a roadside stand every Sunday morning. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And Ryan? He graduated from an overpriced private college not from merit, but because Janet donated an entire computer lab to the school. Right after the ceremony, Ryan received a $200,000 loan from Janet to start a tech company. The The first startup went bankrupt in 14 months. Ryan blamed a backstabbing partner. Second time around, he got money from old friends and launched a pet care app. That one burned through $250,000 in 8 months. The third time, he returned to Janet. Not only did she agree to help, but she also borrowed additional funds from the bank under my dad's name to bankroll Ryan's fresh start. They called me exactly once during all that time, a video call on Christmas. The screen lit up with Ryan's smug face. "Claire, you still in that small town? What is it you do again? Book babysitting? That's adorable." I smiled thinly. Being a librarian teaches you interesting things. Like which books people are most ashamed to return late. Janet chimed in. "Your sister living quietly and staying out of trouble, that's all we can ask for." I looked at the camera. Janet still wore her expensive pearl earrings. Ryan stood in front of a massive Christmas tree inside their glowing mansion. I was sitting in the corner of my room, a wallpapered bookshelf behind me that I'd put up myself. I wanted to say something, but I just nodded and ended the call. I'd grown used to the role they gave me. Claire, the forgettable daughter with a temporary life, no future, no voice. I don't blame them. Not anymore. Because that quiet place they pushed me into, that space where I was invisible, was exactly where I built my edge. And from that shadow, I began my own game. A game I didn't need to win by shining. I just needed them to keep underestimating me, long enough. Until the day I stood up in court, the gavel echoed, and I said every word with clarity. "I'm Claire Hamilton, and I own everything they once stole from me." Grandma Elizabeth passed away on a cold October morning. I got the news in a phone call that lasted less than a minute from an elderly neighbor who used to bring her meals a few times a week. "She passed peacefully, like she was just sleeping," he said, his voice quiet and distant. "I think she knew it was time. There's still a pot of tea warming in the kitchen." I stood frozen, clutching the phone, wind howling outside. This my window like someone crying out. She was the only one in the family who never made me feel like a mistake. Even though we rarely spoke, she never asked why I lived the way I did, never judged, never gave lectures. She just looked at me with calm, knowing eyes. Every visit, she had an old book waiting, one she wanted me to keep. The funeral was simple, attended only by a few neighbors. No one from my family came. Janet once said bluntly, "I'm not wasting time burying some old hermit who lived in the woods with stray cats and melted candles." I didn't feel angry. I just felt regret. Regret that I never got to hug her once after getting the librarian job. Regret that the last time I visited, she was sitting on the porch knitting a scarf, her eyes squinting in the sunlight, speaking to me like she already knew everything. "One day, you'll understand why you had to take the long way around. And when that day comes, don't look back." 3 weeks after the funeral, I received an ivory-colored sealed envelope. On the front, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Only open when alone." The sender was the law office of McCallum and Grant in Salem, Oregon. I brought the envelope home to my apartment, sat at the table, my hands trembling slightly as I opened the thick paper. Inside was a handwritten letter in dark blue ink, the slanted script just like the ones I'd seen on the book covers she used to gift me. "My dear Claire, if you're reading this, then I've already gone. Don't be sad. I've lived enough, and I've prepared everything for this day. I leave no tears, only choice. Don't tell anyone. Don't let anyone know what you have. Silence will be your strongest shield. Wait for the right moment. And when that moment comes, you'll know exactly what to do." Enclosed with the letter was a thick file stamped with the red seal of McCallum and Grant and a small black USB drive. Inside the file was a detailed list of inherited assets in my name, neat, precise, and outlined line by line. Part of me was too stunned to comprehend it. She left me nearly $51 million. Not in cash, not in a savings account collecting dust in a bank, but in investments, quiet, surgical, Swiss watch precise, equity in 3 renewable energy companies in Nevada and Colorado, rental properties in San Diego, Boise, and a resort in Idaho I'd never heard of. And most importantly, I was the sole heir to Redberry Holdings, a private investment fund based in Montana that managed a portfolio worth tens of millions. It took me weeks to fully process it. I couldn't believe she, the woman our family had labeled as eccentric, who lived in a cabin with no Wi-Fi, had been one of the most quietly brilliant investors in the American West. I began digging. I went to the law office and met Mr. McCallum, an elderly man with eyes sharp as steel. Miss Elizabeth never needed noise, he said as we signed the transfer documents. She preferred to observe rather than speak. And she didn't choose you because of blood, she chose you for your patience. I nodded silently. In my head, I heard Janet's mocking laugh, Ryan bragging about his new startup with LED walls and virtual offices, and my father's silence over the years as if I didn't exist. Now I understood why she never sent expensive gifts, why she only gave me books, why she never asked me to prove anything. She had chosen me long ago, and everything she left behind wasn't a rescue. It was a chance. I began to change, but no one noticed. I opened business accounts under the name Everfern Trust, a name plain enough to sound like an herbal tea company, nothing flashy. I hired an investment advisory team in Portland that specialized in anonymous clients. I hired a private attorney in Chicago to set up a 3-layer ownership structure for the assets. I even bought out the audit firm that had once given Ryan's company a poor rating during his second round of fundraising just to make sure he'd never fool anyone again. But I kept living the same way. I still walked to the library every morning, still sorted children's books by color for easier browsing, still ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch, brewed my own coffee in the afternoons. Only one thing had changed. I started watching my family again. Ryan began his 4th round of fundraising for an app that claimed to detect the real emotions behind a person's voice. I had no idea where that concept came from. It sounded like a bad sci-fi plot. Janet once again mortgaged the house they lived in to inject cash into the project. I read a copy of that mortgage agreement from the law office. I had just purchased partial shares in the previous week. Every page was a story I already knew. They believed no one in the world could ever touch them. They had no idea. I was holding the entire deck. I wasn't ready to make a move. I still remembered her. Words. Wait for the right moment. And I believed that moment was coming soon. I lived 2 lives, as separate as parallel worlds that never brushed against each other, not even by shadow. One was Claire Hamilton, a 31-year-old librarian living in a 2nd-floor apartment near the train tracks, walking to the library each morning with a frayed canvas tote and faded sneakers. The other was the sole heir of Elizabeth, the woman behind the Everfern Trust, majority shareholder of 3 investment companies in the West, and the sole person with absolute control over the tightening web of debt surrounding the Morgan family. I still worked regularly, Monday through Friday. I opened the library at 8 o'clock sharp, checked the printer, shelved new arrivals, and brewed a pot of tea for the older guests. I loved the afternoons there, sunlight angling across the shelves, the soft sound of pages turning like breathing. Some days, a high schooler would come in with homework. Other times, an elderly woman would ask for a World War-era cookbook. I lived in a shabby apartment in a low-income neighborhood, with yellowing walls and a creaky wood floor. The kitchen barely fit a toaster oven, a sink and 2 bowls. The fridge held nothing but a few cups of yogurt and a bottle of filtered water. My 2004 Subaru still carried me down gravel roads. The air conditioner had been broken since last year, and I still hadn't taken it in. No one suspected a thing. I was still just Claire, the quiet girl. No noise, no ambition. And Everfern Trust? No one in town had ever heard the name. No one knew that after 8 o'clock each night, once the dishes were washed and lights turned off, I opened the laptop in my bedroom, unlocked 3 layers of security, and accessed my asset management dashboard. On the screen were real-time investment reports, cash flow charts, and financial indices updated by the hour from San Francisco, Denver, and Seattle. I tracked every small fluctuation. One of the firms I held equity in, Larchgrove Ventures, was the same investment fund that had rejected Ryan's second pitch. They'd said his idea, lacked feasibility and a sustainable profit model. I hadn't interfered in that decision, but when the board voted to restructure its portfolio, I was the one who signed off, standing firm. I began scrutinizing my family's debt more closely. Through three shell companies, Palmetto Equities, Willow Ridge Capital, and North Peak Lending, I slowly acquired every piece of their mortgage debt, revolving credit lines, even the short-term loans Janet had hastily signed to rescue Ryan during past failures. Each time I purchased a new contract, I let it sit quietly in the system. No collection, no pressure, just observation. I wanted to see what they'd do once no one was willing to save them anymore. Once, I overheard a conversation between my father and Janet through a misdialed call. They were discussing taking out an unsecured loan from a local bank, putting up the title of their new white Porsche to rush $100,000 into Ryan's media campaign. My father sighed, his voice tired. "Do you think Claire might lend us something? She is our daughter, after all." Janet laughed coldly. "You think she has money? That girl lives off library wages. She tapes her shoes. If she's got even a spare penny, I'll eat this dress." I sat in the dark, quietly typing the command to issue an updated interest notice on the loan Janet didn't know had already been acquired by Willow Ridge Capital just last week. 3 days later, she received a notice. Interest rates had been increased due to a history of late payments. I didn't include any explanation. I didn't feel satisfied. I just stayed silent. One June afternoon, I was invited to a shareholder board meeting in Denver for one of the investment funds where I held controlling shares. The meeting was held on the 28th floor of a modern glass building, thick carpet, water, filtered from a premium dispenser. I arrived in a cream sweater and light gray slacks, hair neatly tied back, no makeup. No one realized I was the largest shareholder in the room. During the presentation, the fund's CEO mentioned a potential new investment, a tech platform currently seeking funding from a startup named Morgan Connect. I looked up. Ryan's logo appeared on the projector screen. The CEO said, "The concept is unusual, but there are no solid metrics yet. However, their representative seems confident they'll receive support from angel investors." I opened my laptop and sent a brief internal message. Recommend pausing all evaluation processes for Morgan Connect until hard data is provided. 15 minutes later, a response from the risk analysis team. Received. Review on hold. The meeting ended. I left quietly. No one said goodbye. No one walked me to the elevator. I preferred it that way. That evening, I returned to my small apartment, made a cup of mint tea, and opened the end-of-day report from Redberry Holdings. The first line read, "Liquidity position stable, growth rate at 4.2%. Net assets exceed $53 million. I shut the screen and leaned back in my chair. The yellow light through the curtains reflected onto the only photo I kept in the room, a picture of me and Elizabeth from my childhood, her hand resting on my shoulder, her gaze as if she could see through time. I suddenly remembered something she once said when I asked why she didn't live in a mansion like other people. "It's not where you live that defines your worth, Claire. It's how you watch in silence and then make the world stop and listen when you choose to speak." I hadn't spoken yet. I was still watching. I received the report on a Monday morning, while I was on a ladder adjusting the sign outside the library that read, "Children's books 50% off." My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I climbed down, wiped my hands on the edge of my sweater, and checked the screen. An email from North Peak Lending, subject line, "Urgent update, Morgan Loan, file 417, B." I opened the attachment. My heart didn't race, my hands didn't tremble, but my eyes lingered on a single line. "Miss Janet Morgan has officially mortgaged the property at 17 Pinecrest Drive, Seattle to secure a personal loan of $380,000. Purpose: redesign investment for Morgan Connect technology platform." I closed the phone, set it down on the checkout counter, and took a deep breath. Pinecrest Drive. The house my dad bought when I was 10, after marrying Janet. The one with the big balcony overlooking the lake, where Janet threw dozens of cocktail parties, Where Ryan learned violin for a few weeks just to impress a private school girlfriend? Where I was once asked not to appear in any of the family photos displayed in the living room? Doesn't match the tone of the wood frame, Janet once said, without even looking at me. I remembered everything. A few days later, a report from the independent auditing firm I'd hired noted an additional expenditure that hadn't been included in the original loan commitment. $82,000 for a Tesla Model X delivered directly to Ryan Morgan. License plate 6JXN128. Registered under Janet Morgan. I didn't need to guess why. White pearl color, leather interior, gull-wing doors. The stereotypical, successful startup look worn by those desperate to mask the rot inside. I didn't react. I documented. I tracked. I quietly logged every item into the Morgan family's asset liability sheet, which I'd personally built into Redberry's portfolio system. I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted them to see themselves clearly, without the makeup, without the branding. That afternoon, I made tea for Miss Tilda, an 85-year-old woman who came to the library every Monday to read the newspaper and reminisce. She asked me, like she always did, "Still not tired of this tiny town, Claire?" I smiled and handed her the cup. "I think it's just right for me." She nodded. "Just right is enough. Don't let anyone force you to live big just to make them feel better." I didn't know why my throat tightened. That night, I reopened Janet's personal credit report. 4 credit cards maxed out, an unpaid bill from a luxury jewelry store, an overdue charge from the high-end fitness center she often tagged on social media. Everything was slipping from their hands, yet they kept living as if nothing was happening. Janet still flaunted million-dollar dinner tables. Ryan still posted about AI team expansion. I started acquiring their smaller debts, each one under the names of shell companies I had prepared long before. I didn't change the terms. I didn't raise the rates. I just quietly gathered. Ryan probably never realized that the contracts he signed under Janet's name had all passed through my hands. He never read the clauses. And Janet, she once dismissed her financial advisor's warnings with a laugh, saying, "He doesn't understand the scale of my son's vision." One night, I came home late. Cold rain fell hard, my coat soaked, keys clicking as I tried to unlock the door. The hallway light flickered from faulty wiring. I leaned against the wall, pulled off my shoes, then sank to the floor. Not because I was tired, but because one question kept spiraling through my mind. Why don't they ever stop? I didn't understand. I used to think people made bad decisions from lack of information. But Janet and Ryan weren't uninformed. They just refused to look reality in the eye. I remembered one time when I was 28. Janet ran into me at the local supermarket. I was filling my basket with discount items, day-old bread, wilted greens, store-brand coffee. She stood a few steps away, holding a bottle of imported wine and a box of European cookies, smiling like she'd just seen a familiar joke. "Claire, my cousin just opened an organic boutique in Portland. You should try it, if you want to look less exhausted." I glanced at my basket, then looked up and asked softly, "Have you ever considered that? Maybe I don't need to look expensive to feel valuable?" Janet shrugged, gave a light laugh like I'd said something hopelessly naive. "People are born into class, Claire. You should accept reality." I didn't respond. But that very night, I officially transferred all equity in the finance company, managing Janet's debt, into a new branch entity titled Sweet Arsenic Internal Note. No counterattack necessary. Only timing. Every night, when I sat in my cold apartment with a cup of tea, reading through cash flow reports, I kept wondering, if one day they lost it all, the house, the car image, the reputation, would they ever return to who they really were? Would Janet ever call me daughter? Would Ryan ever stop smirking every time he saw me in old clothes? I didn't have the answer. But I was patient. Because Elizabeth once told me, "Wait for the right moment, Claire. When you're quiet enough, you'll hear the first crack in the mask people wear." And I heard it. The cracks had begun. My cousin Natalie's wedding was held at a lakeside resort in Chelan, where the afternoon sun stretched across the water like it was painted in gold. The entire Morgan family was there, from distant relatives I didn't recognize to the ones who'd cut me out of family photos. Janet was in charge of the event, and she spared no expense to turn it into a flashy display. I got the invitation almost 2 weeks later than everyone else. No handwritten note, no personal message, just my name printed at the bottom corner of the cream-colored card so subtle it looked like part of the return address. I thought about skipping it. But then I looked at the old painting I'd carefully wrapped in velvet, a traditional ink painting that used to hang in Elizabeth's tiny sitting room, where I spent hours reading as a child. It was a gift, one she'd spoken about in a low, serious voice like it was her final instruction. On Natalie's wedding day, give this. Don't say anything, just leave it. Then go. I wore a simple blue dress, low heels frayed at the edge, and carried the painting tied in a beige linen ribbon. No one greeted me when I walked into the reception hall. Eyes slid past me, then quickly away like I was a caterer who wandered into the VIP section by mistake. I wasn't surprised. I headed for the gift table, gently placed the painting down, and was about to step away when I heard Janet's voice behind me, louder and sharper than ever. "Claire?" I turned. She was standing with a group of older guests, some longtime business, partners of my father, others distant aunts who once laughed in my face when I asked to intern at one of their husbands' law firms when I was 20. Janet walked closer, her eyes flashing something between anger and contempt. "What is this?" "A gift for Natalie," I answered softly. "Elizabeth's painting," she scoffed, not even bothering to look at it. "We don't take gifts from people who live off pity, Claire." The air around us froze. Someone cleared his throat. A woman turned away, pretending to check her phone. Natalie was still taking photos and didn't hear, but I knew someone would tell her. I didn't say a word. I smiled gently, adjusted the corner of the painting to make sure it sat straight, then nodded at the group like I'd just completed a final task. I walked out of the hall without looking back. That afternoon, it rained in Seattle. I didn't drive straight home. I stopped by my attorney's office on the 18th floor of a downtown building. Her assistant had already placed the contract on the desk. Next to it sat the financial folder updated through the latest week. I sat down, opened the file, and scanned the familiar numbers. Second mortgage on the Pinecrest Drive estate principal unpaid, interest rising steadily each month. Secondary credit loan 3 payments overdue. Risk level, high. I nodded. The assistant handed me a pen. I signed. And as the blue ink dried on the paper, I officially became the sole holder of the Morgan Estates mortgage, the house Janet once said, "Only the worthy are allowed to enter." I had no intention of taking their home. At least, not yet. But I needed them to understand that every choice they ever made, every time they tried to erase me as if I didn't exist, had consequences. That night, I got home late. The rain still hadn't stopped. My apartment was quiet. I turned on the warm light in the living room and pulled back the curtain. From the 3rd floor I could only see dripping rooftops across the street and a few flickering street lamps. No shimmering lake reflections, no music, no wedding dress, no toasts, just me. And the silence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. I opened my laptop and logged into Redberry's system. The newest internal message from the finance team reported that the total assets I managed had surpassed $56 million. I typed a note into the Pinecrest property file. Status: closely monitored. No action, await proper timing. I remembered Janet's eyes when she looked at the painting, the one she didn't even bother glancing at, and I wondered if she'd ever understand that the things she called worthless carried more weight than all the diamonds, wedding rings, or Teslas she ever poured her money into to protect the image. I thought of Natalie. I didn't know if she ever unwrapped the painting. If she noticed the faint handwriting in the lower corner, Elizabeth's own fading ink that read, "For the grandchild who knows how to value quietness." I didn't expect her to understand. I just left it, as instructed, then walked away, without another word. Because everything that needed saying, I would let the numbers speak for me. 3 months after Natalie's wedding, I was reorganizing the American history section at the library when I noticed a figure standing outside the glass door. The person didn't enter right away, just stood there, holding her bag, the weight in her posture unmistakable. I knew that silhouette instantly. Even after so long without seeing her up close, I recognized her. Janet. I set the book on the shelf, adjusted my glasses, and stepped out from behind the desk. The door opened with a soft chime, a sound that gently reminded visitors this space belonged to stillness. She stepped in, her face gaunt, hair pulled up loosely, no makeup, no perfume, a completely unfamiliar image of the woman who once banned me from family events for not matching the family aura. Claire, her voice cracked. I nodded politely. I didn't invite her to sit, but I didn't walk away either. I need to talk, if that's okay. I gestured toward the reading table in the corner, where the light was softest. We sat across from each other, surrounded by old books and the fading scent of paper. I don't know where to begin, she said, eyes avoiding mine. I stayed quiet, letting her search for the words. The house is about to be foreclosed. They've sent the third notice. If we don't pay the full amount in 10 days, they'll lock the property. I wasn't surprised. I'd known before she even received the letter, because I had approved the delivery schedule from the legal office at Willow Ridge Capital, one of 3 lending firms I owned indirectly. I don't know where else to turn. I sold my wedding ring, liquidated my purse collection, even pawned the Tesla. Still not enough. Ryan. Her voice broke, and she wiped away tears. Ryan said he was negotiating with an investment fund, but they suddenly canceled. I knew that fund. It was also one of the companies where I held controlling shares. I was the one who had approved the rejection of Ryan's proposal during the board meeting. Claire, I didn't come here to beg, but I truly have no one else to call. She looked up at me, her eyes no longer holding the power they once did, only exhaustion, confusion, and fear. Could you help me? Just a little. We're still family. I sat still for a long moment, then stood up and walked to my desk in the corner. I opened a drawer and took out a plain white envelope. Inside was the entire amount of cash I'd saved from my job at the library over nearly a year, exactly $2,000. I turned back and placed the envelope on the table between us. You once said I lived off pity, that I couldn't take care of myself. Well, I've got 2,000. It's everything I actually have in this life, if I believe what you all used to believe. Janet said nothing. She just stared at the envelope like it was something both unfamiliar and painful. That's all you have? I smiled gently. Well, it's more than I was ever given, isn't it? She didn't answer, just nodded quietly, her lips pressed tight. I didn't watch her as she left the library. I just stood there, eyes on the floor, my hands still slightly trembling after holding that envelope. Not because I regretted the money, but because I could give something without needing to be seen. That night, my phone rang. It was Ryan. I didn't answer right away. I sat and stared at the glowing screen, his name sharp against the dark background. After 3 rings, I tapped, accept. Who do you think you are? Ryan's voice exploded, no greeting. I stayed silent. My mother just came home, crying like a maniac. You gave her $2,000? Were you trying to humiliate her? You're a damn disgrace. I paused for a few seconds, then replied quietly. I gave her exactly what I truly have, just like how everyone's always measured me. So what's wrong with that? You don't get it. The family's in crisis, and you just sit there, acting like none of it's your concern. That's right, Ryan. I was never really counted as part of the family to begin with. The line went dead silent. I ended the call and set the phone down. On my laptop screen, I opened the Everfern Trust system, accessed the Mortgage Asset Management tab, and selected the Morgan account Pinecrest Drive. I issued the command, demand for full repayment. Deadline, 10 days. Attachment, asset reclamation clause per contract terms. I knew the order would send Janet into a panic. I knew Ryan would explode again, maybe even show up at the library. But I couldn't delay it any longer. Because silence, at some point, becomes a form of complicity, and I refused to be complicit in the downfall of people who never saw me as their own. I brewed myself a cup of tea, cracked open the window to let the cold air in, and sat watching raindrops gather on the glass. I thought of the painting Elizabeth left behind, the words she'd written, "For the grandchild who knows how to value quietness." I was valuing it, step by step. No hatred, no revenge. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning at 8:30 at the King County Courthouse. From the moment I stepped into the hallway, the air was thick with tension and curiosity. A few local reporters hovered near the entrance, raising their cameras to catch shots through the frosted glass. Weekend headlines had already run bold. Morgan family faces bankruptcy, a legacy at risk. I entered the courtroom calm, no designer dress, no jewelry. Just a white blouse, light gray slacks, and a thick, mist-colored coat. My hair was tied neatly at the nape of my neck. I didn't want to stand out, I wanted to be unmistakable. Janet was already seated at the defendant's table, beside my father, the man who years ago chose silence over standing by his own daughter. Ryan came in last, still wearing sunglasses, smoky gray blazer, and glued to his phone. They didn't seem to notice me, or if they did, they gave no sign. The judge entered right on time and banged the gavel 3 times. Civil bankruptcy hearing number 5482. Defendant, the Morgan family. Will the creditor's legal representative please identify themselves? I stood. Claire Hamilton, legal representative for Everfern Trust, current holder of all mortgage, credit, and business loan liabilities tied to the Morgan family, totaling $14,230,000. A chill swept through the room. Whispers rippled across the back row. A reporter dropped their pen. I didn't look at them. I looked only at the judge's bench. Janet whipped her head toward me, eyes wide, lips trembling. My father looked like he'd turned to stone. Ryan took off his sunglasses and stared at me like he'd never seen me before. I met their eyes, calm as if I were delivering a quarterly finance report. What? What did you say? Janet burst out, almost shouting. Claire, you're the creditor? I didn't answer. The judge motioned for order. Miss Hamilton, please present your debt resolution proposal. I opened my leather case and pulled out a stack of documents, each page marked with a small tab. I handed one copy to the court clerk, another to the Morgan's attorney. I have no intention of seizing homes or personal property unless necessary. I'm proposing a debt restructuring plan under 3 mandatory conditions. I looked up, meeting the eyes of each family member who had once ignored, dismissed, and ridiculed me. First, Ryan Morgan will lose all access to family financial resources. No credit cards, no secondary accounts. He will be required to take a real, manual labor job as a warehouse associate at the Fresh and Box grocery chain in Auburn. The job is already arranged. Starting wage, $15 per hour. Minimum duration, 12 months. You've got to be kidding me. Ryan shot to his feet, face red. I founded a tech startup. I have a team. I'm in negotiations. You burned through over $1 million of family money in 5 years. I said, voice steady, each word sharp as glass. It's time you learn how to earn each dollar with your own sweat. Second, I turned to Janet and my father. You will vacate the Pinecrest Drive estate. I've acquired the mortgage. The house will transfer to Everfern Trust within 45 days. A modest, single-story home in rural Kentville has been arranged 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a backyard with fruit trees. Monthly living expenses must not exceed $2,000. A financial advisor will monitor all spending. Janet's mouth hung open. My father bowed his head. I didn't linger. I flipped to the final page. Third, the Morgan family must surrender all remaining assets, shares, luxury furnishings, vehicles, bank accounts transferred to Everfern Trust for financial redistribution and complete debt payoff. The Morgan's attorney rifled through the paperwork, whispering to my father. After several minutes, the judge spoke again. I require a formal response from the defendants. Do you accept or reject the proposal? No one answered immediately. Janet whispered, Claire, how could you do this to your own family? I looked at her. You once said I didn't belong in this family. Now you can keep your word. This isn't punishment. This is the only chance you have to start over without losing everything. Ryan turned away. My father shut his eyes. We accept, the attorney replied. The judge nodded and signed the record. The court acknowledges. Hearing is adjourned. I gathered the documents and nodded my thanks to the judge. As I stepped out of the courtroom, I heard a voice behind me, trembling. Claire, sweetheart. I stopped, turned around. Janet was standing there, hair disheveled, eyes red, hands clenching the hem of her blouse. Why did it have to be you? I looked at her, gently, without anger, because no one else had enough patience to prove that the abandoned one can still save an entire family. I walked away in silence. No reporters followed. No applause. Only the quiet echo of my shoes against the stone hallway, and a calm in my chest that said, I didn't choose destruction. I chose conditions, and they had no choice but to listen. I didn't go to the Pinecrest Drive estate on the day they moved out. They had 45 days to rearrange their entire lives, but I knew Janet would cling to the very last moment. That was her nature, living by image, and if she had to let go, she'd do it with her chin held high, even if she was crumbling inside. I got word they left at 6 p.m. on a Wednesday. One of the moving staff called to report, the house is completely empty. Keys returned on time, one box left on the front step. Inside, an old collection of silver spoons and a small card. If anyone still values this, please keep it. I knew that handwriting. It was Janet's. The following week, I went to Pinecrest Drive. The mansion stood in silence, no music, no chandeliers glowing from the living room window. I walked through the wide hallway where the family portrait once hung, the one I was never in, and into the living room where I was once told to stand off to the corner whenever important guests came. I stood there for a long while, then called the architect's office. I wanted to turn what was once a symbol of exclusion and artificial luxury into something real. A place where people could come to read, learn, search for opportunity regardless of what they wore, what they drove, or where they came from. I named the project the Elizabeth Community Library. 3 months later, the mansion's gates opened to the public. No red carpet, no gold-framed clocks. Instead, simple wooden bookshelves, a children's reading room with natural light, and a quiet zone on the second floor for students and seniors needing solitude. One Saturday afternoon, while I was checking the new AI-integrated library system, I saw Ryan standing outside the gate. He wore a dark blue delivery uniform, held a small cardboard box, cap pulled low. He looked into the courtyard, at the freshly painted silver sign above the door, Elizabeth Community Library, a quiet place to begin again. I didn't go out, I just watched. Ryan stood there for a few minutes, then walked away. The next day, a library staff member sent me a photo from the camera. Ryan had come back at noon, without the cap. He placed the package on the reception desk and said simply, "Book delivery from the print shop." No signature needed. Before leaving, he paused briefly at the "read for free if you need to" shelf where I had placed a photo of Grandma and a quote, "True strength doesn't shout. It simply stays." He didn't take a book. But there was a strange softness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. A few weeks later, I received an email from the local church pastor. Subject: a word of thanks. The body was only a few lines. Sister Claire, I don't know what you did, but ever since Mrs. Janet Morgan started coming to church every Thursday, we've had a new cooking group. She teaches how to make soup from donated food, sweet rolls with low-sugar dough, and whenever someone asks, she just says, "I'm learning how to begin again." I went still reading that. I remembered so clearly how Janet once said, "I never step into a kitchen. That's the help's job." Yet now, she was teaching others to bake with, the same hands that once wore 2-carat diamond rings. No one forced her. No one pushed her there. Only the truth. The truth when there's nothing left to hide behind is its own work. Another afternoon, while I was in my 4th-floor office at Everfern Tower in Seattle, My assistant delivered a brown paper package with no return address. Inside was an old ring box, the white gold wedding band Janet had once sold to buy Ryan a car, and a note scribbled in pencil. Too expensive to keep, too sentimental to throw away. Sending it back to the one who knew how to keep things in their true worth. Thank you, Claire. I didn't write back, but I kept the ring. Not for its value, because Janet sent me a thank you, not wrapped in arrogance or conditions. One autumn afternoon, I passed through Kentville unannounced. The small house at the end of Magnolia Street had a newly repaired roof and a backyard lined with green wild herbs. I stood across the road, not walking in, just watching. My father was polishing the windows. Janet was in the backyard, placing sprigs of lavender into a small ceramic vase. I couldn't hear them, but I saw something I had never seen before, a kind of quiet that wasn't forced, a kind of surrender that wasn't bitter. And that was the first time I walked away without needing to look back. I didn't need them to see me as the victor. I didn't need them to admit I was right. I just needed them to begin changing, bit by bit, in silence. 3 years after the King County Court hearing, I sat in my glass office on the 42nd floor of Everfern Tower in downtown Chicago. Below me, the city pulsed, fast cars, crowds, a rhythm of urgency. But in my office, there was only soft golden light and the scent of mint tea drifting from an old porcelain cup, the kind Grandma Elizabeth always loved. I still kept one routine. Every Saturday morning, I flew back to Seattle on the earliest flight, leaving the office before anyone. I noticed I was gone. I'd drive north, turn onto the winding road that led to the old mansion now known as the Elizabeth Community Library. Locals called it the reading house on the street because it didn't look like a stiff, modern library. It was a place where a child could curl up on a pillow, hold a book in trembling hands, and read aloud in the circle of grown-ups. A place where elderly folks came during winter to reread old favorites, sometimes just to remember a name. I usually sat in the children's corner, where sunlight always streamed through the window right at 11 a.m., reading a simple story in a soft voice for the kids to listen. They didn't know who I was. They only knew me as Miss Claire, the storyteller. No one there knew I was the one behind Everfern Trust, managing over $80 million in assets across Colorado and Boston. I didn't need them to know. One early spring afternoon, just as the tulips outside the library garden began to bloom, I received a cream-colored envelope with silver trim. The return address was from Kentville, written in a slanted handwriting I recognized from the old Christmas cards that used to hang in the Pinecrest mansion years ago. Janet. I opened the envelope slowly, as if each fold still carried the faded air of someone who once didn't consider me blood. Inside was a small card, decorated with pressed lavender between handmade paper, very different from the lavish styles she used to favor. The handwriting had softened, slightly hesitant but clear. Claire, we're having a small dinner this Sunday. If you're free, I hope you'll come eat with the family. Not to talk about the past. Just to have a meal. Like family. Mom. P.S. This time I'm calling you daughter. Not because I need something. I sat in silence for quite a while after reading that. Looking out the window, where the afternoon light was slowly fading across the tall city buildings, I felt a quiet stream. Tells stir inside, warm, gentle, and aching all at once. I didn't go back. Instead, I went home, opened the old drawer beneath the staircase where I still kept a few belongings from Elizabeth's cabin. Among them was a wool scarf she had knitted for me when I first entered college, deep blue, worn at the edges, but still fragrant with dried lavender. I wrapped the scarf gently, placed it in a plain brown paper box, no decoration, no floral card, just a folded sheet of paper with one sentence. Mom, I forgive you, but I won't return. 3 days later, I received a response. Not a letter, not a call, but a photo, taken secretly through the stained glass window of the Kentville church. Janet, wrapping the wool scarf around her neck, holding a tray of toast, standing among a group of elderly women laughing together. I don't know who sent that picture. Maybe someone from the library. Maybe someone who once received free bread from Janet on a rainy afternoon. But the important part wasn't who sent it. It was the smile on the face of the woman who once despised humility, who once chose appearance over affection. Ryan, on the other hand, remained silent. Since the day I saw him at the library in that delivery uniform, he hadn't reached out. No messages, no letters, no questions. But every month, I still received internal reports from the HR department of a nonprofit in Portland, where Ryan now worked as a tech support staffer for digital literacy programs aimed at disadvantaged youth. One note in the file read, "Never absent, always arrives early, often stays late to help clean, has never requested extra pay." I read every line carefully, then closed the file. No smile. No sigh. Just a lightness like a part of me, the part that always wondered would they ever change, had finally received a quiet, steady answer. That night, as snow began falling softly, I went up to the rooftop of my building, the place I usually sat on sleepless nights. Holding a warm cup of tea, I looked up at the scattered stars through the misty sky. I thought of her, of how she held her tea, how she once taught me about stocks, using kernels of corn and an old glass jar, how she looked at me when I stayed quiet under ridicule, refusing to flinch. "Don't rush to answer, Claire," she once said. "Because when you're strong enough, you won't need to shout. You just have to show up. And your silence will speak louder than anything else. Now I understand." I smiled softly, not out of triumph, but because I was finally at peace, no longer needing to fight for anything. That morning, just as I stepped into the Elizabeth Library, the scent of fresh pine and old paper still hanging in the air, a little girl about 8 or 9 years old with shoulder-length hair and a pale purple sweater walked shyly toward me. She stood at the threshold for a moment, looking around, then asked in a voice as light as wind brushing past, "Ma'am, how do I make people stop looking down on me?" I looked at her. Those wide, unsure eyes held something that made my heart sink. Not sadness, exactly. More like recognition, the feeling of seeing a younger version of myself, the one who used to hide in classroom corners, the one who once stood behind the living room curtain while adults sighed over financial burdens, because there was one more sick child. I sat on a bench and patted the empty space beside me. The girl sat, still too timid to lift her head. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Emily. Is this your first time here?" "Yes, ma'am. My class came on a field trip, but the other kids went to the art exhibit. I didn't want to go." I nodded, opened the bookshelf behind me, ran my fingers across the familiar spines, then pulled out a simple gray-covered book, Grit, a book I had read no fewer than 5 times. I placed it on Emily's lap, speaking slowly. "You don't need anyone else to believe in. You, Emily. You just need to believe in yourself." She stayed quiet for a while, then looked up with wide eyes. "But if I stay quiet all the time, will anyone ever see me?" I smiled and placed my hand over the book's cover. "There were times I thought the same thing, Emily, that the whole world had turned away, that no one cared I even existed. But then I realized, you don't need to be seen to have value, because your worth doesn't live in someone else's eyes. It lives in what you do, quietly, every single day. Like this book, not flashy, not loud, but it can change a life." She nodded gently, hugging the book to her chest. I walked her over to the children's reading corner, where a few kids sat cross-legged on the rug, surrounding an elderly lady reading Charlotte's Web. I watched from a distance as Emily hesitated, then picked a quiet spot and sat down. I saw her shoulders relax. That afternoon, after everyone had left the library, I sat alone on the second floor near the large window that looked out onto the quiet street. The cherry trees out front were still bare winter, refusing to loosen its grip, but spring sunlight had begun to stretch softly across the ground. I placed my hot tea on the table, leaned back in my chair, and closed my eyes for a few seconds. Emily's question still echoed in my head. It was an old sound, one I'd heard in the wind, in the mocking laughs of childhood classmates, in the bored eyes of teachers who only paid attention to kids with parents driving fancy cars. How do you stop people from looking down on you? I hadn't had the answer for nearly 20 years. I had tried to please everyone, bent myself to fit into molds they set. I thought if I studied harder, dressed better, kept quieter, maybe they'd stop looking down on me. But no, they only saw me through the label they had already decided on. The girl living off pity, the niece not worth being proud of, the daughter left behind the police. Curtain. It was only when I stopped trying to please everyone, stopped begging for affection, stopped searching for approving eyes that I truly began to live. No one needed to see who I was. As long as I saw myself, that was enough. I opened my eyes and looked out at the sky, turning a soft shade of orange. A group of children ran across the courtyard, their laughter echoing like water tapping stone pure and honest. I didn't know if Emily would finish reading Grit, or if she'd forget the book on a chair, or put it back on the wrong shelf. But I did know, even if just one line in that book touched her heart, that would be enough. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked along the wooden hallway leading to the back building where I kept a small room, arranged just like the one I once shared with my grandmother. Only this time, I was the one who had placed every item by hand. On the wall was the only photo frame, a picture of me and Grandma Elizabeth on the day I received my college scholarship. We were both smiling. She wore a gray knitted shawl, and I held a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the backyard. I stood before the glass, laid my hand on the wood, now faded with time, and whispered in my heart, I was once the girl no one saw. But that's all right, because when it's finally my turn to speak, the whole world will listen. What do you think about my choice? About forgiving, but not going back? About choosing to rebuild memories with quiet love, instead of reclaiming everything through anger? I believe each of us has our own journey to define our worth. Some find it in the spotlight. Others, like me, find it in the pages of a book, in the quiet growing up of children tucked into corners of a library. If you've ever felt left behind, if you've ever had to walk through the dark alone, I'd like to hear your story. Please share it with me. Because maybe someone out there needs to see themselves in your words. And if you'd like to keep exploring with me these tender stories about family, pain, resilience, and the strength of forgiveness, hit follow on this channel. There are still so many stories I want to tell. Everyday slices of life, sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes full of hope, but always real. Always ours.